Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Junker, and welcome to our special event, the Local Food Report Roundup Cooking the Harvest. Now let's get started. We're going to begin with Elspeth Hay, creator and host of CAI's Local Food Report, which is heard weekly on CAI on Thursdays and Saturday mornings. There she talks with growers, harvesters, processors, cooks, policymakers, recipe fanatics. Hi, Elspeth.
Hi.
And also joining us today, Wesley Price, who is founder of the Cape Cod Mycological Society. He started that in 2013 with the goal of inspiring a deeper understanding and respect for the ecosystems which support the biodiversity of life on Earth. He's a mushroom hunter and he gives tours. Hi, Wesley.
Hey, good morning, Steve.
Elspeth, looks like you're joining us from your kitchen. You've got something cooking, I imagine. What would we smell if we were in the kitchen with you right now?
I am in my kitchen. I have a bitter, hearty orange marmalade cooking. I just turned it off because it's getting to the point of thickness, and I think if I keep going, it will turn into a rock. So I am, the smell, it's kind of hard. It's floral, it's citrusy. It's not your typical orange smell. I actually just made some with my mom, and she said even if you didn't like the flavor, it would be worth making it just for the smell. So
nice. I'm waiting for Zoom to bring us smells too.
Yeah, that would be nice.
We're going to focus today on foraging a lot. And for the uninitiated, just tell us, what is foraging and what are you talking about when you tell somebody you like to go out foraging?
Foraging, I think of as just a curiosity about the place that you live and the ways that you can interact with that place. And we all have things that we need to live: food, water, shelter, and things that make living more fun, like plant dyes and colors and art. And so a lot of these things, I have been always curious since I was a kid. I always used to ask my parents, how do you do it the real way? What's the real way? So without the shortcut of going to the store and buying stuff, how can you find what you need? And I think that is the question that is at the heart of foraging. So it's really about curiosity about the place where you are.
I imagine foraging is a seasonal endeavor. So we're going to talk today a lot about what we can find when we're foraging out this time of year. You talk about how, as a kid, you were always curious about what's the real way. Is that how you got started? Was it your own curiosity? Did you have a foraging mentor, somebody who took you out and would teach you things as you were walking through wild places, what to look for?
I didn't. Well, my parents are bird watchers. So they were always taking us, my sister and I, to places to look for things, but I was never that interested in the birds. I wanted to know about other stuff. And I did go to a school when I was a junior in high school called the Maine Coast Semester. And that was where I really started learning how to interact with food plants in my environment. And then I have been super lucky to have been given the chance to do the Local Food Report, which basically means that every week I get to find a new mentor and go ask them questions and see what they're doing with what they have. And that has been an amazing education and one that I'm super passionate about sharing with other people.
Wesley, let's turn to you for a moment. Mycology is about mushrooms. You're a mushroom hunter. Is the Cape a particularly good place for edible mushrooms?
I don't know if the Cape is any better than any other environment necessarily. We have a unique species here, excuse me. Certainly, however, the mushrooms are fungi are ubiquitous across the planet, and there's lots of environments where they flourish.
How did you get started? As a kid, were you always interested in mushrooms?
No, I wasn't interested in mushrooms, but I guess my parents introduced me to gardening when I was very young. I used to, pick green beans out of the garden. So I was an outdoor kid, barefoot and dirty. And you sort of notice what's around you when you're out there. And so I guess that's part of part of where the love for it took place. I also think I love puzzles, and I used to love to do puzzles that were 1,000 pieces, very large puzzles as a kid. And I feel like fungi is a part of a puzzle of how we view and see the natural world and how we understand the world around us. And sort of understanding that piece, I think, it's like an edge piece to the puzzle. You try to do all the edge pieces first, and then you can fill in the middle. So maybe that's one way I got into it.
Elspeth, talk a little bit about foraging right now and this time of year, some of the things that you associate with this time of year as you think about, we're in late October, and there's things out there that are only come into season right now, and you must be waiting for sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot happening right now, end of the season. I am every year I go for cranberries, which a lot of people do. Those are pretty well known on the Cape, and there are a lot of, I feel like I'm constantly learning new spots that people go to, and obviously they're also cultivated. It's also time for a lot of those late season fruits. So one aspect of foraging that isn't talked about a lot is I think it counts as foraging if you notice a fruit tree or a plant in someone's yard or garden that you think isn't being harvested, and you form a relationship with that person. And I've formed some really cool friendships that way. I have a new to me friend who has this bitter hardy orange tree, and I noticed that every year when I walked by, the oranges were all over the ground. And first of all, I thought, how cool that you could grow oranges on Cape Cod. I mean, that shocked me. And also, can you eat them? What's going on with these oranges? And now, because of the pandemic, we're more of email buddies than in-person friends. But, it turns out she also has this oak tree that produces an abundance of unusual acorns. She has grapevines. So that's one thing that I would say, don't forget about the cultivated landscape when you're foraging. I think people think, oh, foraging always is wild. And I think there's a big urban foraging movement too that's happening, where people are foraging in more settled places. I am picking up a lot of acorns. A lot of people don't know that acorns are edible. They are. They were a staple food for humans for thousands and thousands of years. They've been largely forgotten by a lot of us. And oaks do this thing called masting. So one year they'll have a really prolific amount of acorns, and then for a few years it'll be smaller. And I've only been tracking acorns for a few years, but this year is bigger than any of the years that I've seen in the past few years. So we can talk a bit more about acorns, but now is the time, and there are lots of them. And you can make flour out of them. That's the end goal there. Let's see, what else? I'm going out a little. Some of the spring greens that are good in the spring are coming back right now. Nettles, that kind of thing.
The spring greens come back in the fall?
Yeah, they're not as good, but they are there, and they don't like the heat. So they'll kind of die down or flower in the summer. But a lot of them have cycles where they're putting out seeds after that flowering. And some of those seeds will wait to sprout in the spring, and some of them are coming up right now. So like garlic mustard, if people are familiar with that, I'm seeing right now a resurgence of that, which is great for pesto or sauteing or a salad green. You want to cut it a little with other things, but it's very flavorful.
Somebody was asking about your orange marmalade, which you were talking about there. Patricia is asking, are the bitter oranges the Seville oranges? Are they used for traditional bitter orange marmalade?
They are.
What is it that you're doing with them there?
Well, these are not the Seville oranges. From what I understand, I haven't used a Seville orange, but I think they're pretty similar. They're called trifoliate. I think pontifica, I want to say, is the scientific name. They're much more common further south, but they can be grown here, especially if you have a south-facing little courtyard or something like that. And they have the thing about orange peels is that they're really high naturally in pectin. So a lot of fruits won't make a good jam or jelly, or a lot of people will add apples to something because apples are really high in pectin. You don't have to do that with oranges. They have, the fruit itself doesn't have a lot of pectin, but the peels, which is what you use for marmalade, does. So if you, I think you'll be able to see in here, this is getting really thick. I just stopped it because one thing that you should always know about jams and jellies is that they are runnier when they're hot. So if you cook them to the consistency that you want them to be when they're cool, when they're hot, what you'll end up with is a rock. So that is to be avoided. But I like to make this, and then I do about half of it. I add cranberries and make a cranberry orange marmalade. And then the other half I leave straight with oranges, and they're really good for making old-fashioned cocktails if you like those.
It's about 10:30 in the morning right now, but
yes, later. And Christmas presents.
Yes. Wesley, I want to ask you about mushrooms and identification. I guess when I ask you about getting started in mushroom hunting, it's because getting started in mushrooms seems so daunting to me, because you don't want to make a misstep, I understand. Tell us, what are some of the characteristics of mushrooms that you teach people to look at as you're going out mushroom hunting?
Well, I think the structure of the mushroom is sort of, you have the basic structure. You have your cap, you have your stem, you have your gills. This is sort of a fruiting, this is a fleshy fungi that looks like your standard mushroom that folks are used to. And then you have a base at the mushroom, of the mushroom. And there's this characteristics that each of those pieces have. One of the most important characteristics of the fruiting mushroom, fleshy fungi, are the fact that they produce spores. And so you can actually take a spore print of a mushroom, and the color of that spore print will help determine what genera the species falls into. And then you can take its other characteristics and sort of narrow down your choices from there. So certainly looking at and understanding the structures of the mushrooms, taking the time to see some key identifying characteristics can be the difference really between life and death.
And we've been in this drought now for quite some time. Is that affecting the mushrooms?
Absolutely, yes. The mushrooms are 80 to 90% water. I have a photo here of some mycelium, which is the underground root structure of the fungi, and they transport nutrients in water. And are really, without water, they will they will just sort of be latent and dormant and waiting for rain. And so the drought has certainly affected both the harvest and just the general health of, I think, all plants as well. This most recent rain we got will be is helping things fruit again. And I think the fungi will sort of wait for that. And then they feel they can move things around. They can produce fruit bodies. They have enough energy to do that. And they're doing that now.
Fungi, mushrooms, are they seasonal just like other plants? So do you look forward to a fall harvest of certain kinds of mushrooms?
Yes, there are seasonal fluctuations in what species grow, but really fungi are there all year round. There are certain species that fruit at certain times of the year. Could be different times of the year in different parts of the country. Yes.
For us on the Cape now, what are you looking at as you go out? If you were going to go out this weekend, are there some that you would particularly be focused on? Yeah,
the genus Boletus right now is, and Sowillus lexinum, the sort of fleshy fungi that have pores, they're pored mushrooms. Those are fruiting, and they're great edibles, great to forage. They're not all edible, but a lot of them are, and getting to the point where you understand a few of them is fairly easy. Site identification certainly can help with that. So yeah, the Boletus genus right now is starting to fruit with the rains we've had in the past couple of weeks.
Are there common names for them? If you're not calling them the genus Boletus, are they?
I try not to use common names. Sometimes I will. There's a red top, which is it's a lexinum. mushroom. It's got a bright red top to it. It's sort of firm. I don't have a photo of it here, but I can actually look in the guide here. The common names can be misleading because some people call something one thing and it's actually something else. So just from a purely safety standpoint, I try to use the Latin. Sometimes there'll be some fun names that are common names that I'll throw out there.
I want to talk to you, Elspeth, a little bit more about foraging right now, because I know that you went out this past weekend with our producer Alicia Orsini to a favorite spot of yours. And from what I understand, you guys went in a little bit deep into the water and you looked over the beach. And let's take.
On a Friday evening with family in tow, I met Elspeth Hay for some foraging in an undisclosed location somewhere on the Outer Cape. Here's what we found.
Okay, so this is a favorite cranberry bog of mine. It's really tiny, but you can see the color they get this time of year. And you can see some of these are all dried up, which I'm pretty sure is because of the drought. That's pretty abnormal. And normally if I stick my hand in here, this would all be wet and it's really dry. But I'm still finding some. So if you come around in here, I'll show you what the good ones look like. So here's a little handful. You can see some are small, but some are nice and big. They're really firm, and they're gonna make a really good cranberry orange marmalade. And you can saute those. I would recommend going out for them more in the spring. However, this time of year is a really good time of year to notice them and to make a plan for the spring. Because in the spring, so this year at the beginning of the pandemic, they will be coming up like just this tiny little thing through the sand. But if you know where there's a big patch, like I came to this patch in the spring, and it's one of the first things that's up, and you can pick a bunch and then do like a stir fry or have them with eggs, and they have that pea flavor. If you eat them like as a third of your diet or something ridiculous, they are toxic, but I don't anticipate any of us switching over to 1/3 each pea leaves. So you can see like in here too, notice the difference between these two colors. Like this is probably good, and I would take that. But only these most tender little shoots, because they'll start to get tough. And you can eat the peas. I'm kind of surprised actually that we're not seeing any, but those, they start to flower in June, and then later in the summer they'll put out peas. But see, look, this is what the shoot looks like in the spring. See that? So they'll just start coming up, and right when they're even like hiding just at sand level is when they're really good. If you're feeling adventurous, I see a sandbar out there. It is low tide. We could go look for a few razor clams.
Let's do it.
All right, yeah. Let's do it.
No, let's do it.
Okay.
Hey, if the local food report producer tells you we should go hunting for razor clams, bring a change of clothing.
Extra likely to cut you because you're not being careful.
Right. Sadly, no razor clams, but a quahog and a surf clam, so that was cool. We had one more stop before we ended the day.
this is bayberry. It's everywhere. Every walk you take on the Cape, you will probably see it somewhere. You can dry the leaves like you would bay leaves. It doesn't, I'm going to admit that I don't actually know what bay leaves do for soup. And I have never noticed a difference if you put a bay leaf in or not, but these are apparently able to be used as a substitute for bay leaves. So sometimes, every once in a while, I'll just break off a piece, dry some, and then I fill up my bay leaf jar so that when I make soup, I feel like I'm doing that thing that you do with bay leaves. But mostly what I like about them is not the soup part, it's that they smell amazing. And if you have them hanging up to dry in your kitchen, it just makes your kitchen smell really nice. So it's more about the ritual than the end result with the bayberry. But you can also pick over here you can see those grayish, bluish berries. You can pick those, and those can be used to make candles.
Elspeth, it's a reminder too of just how wonderful this place is that we live, Cape Cod. That not only can we go through the dunes and we have the trees and the forest to forage through, but then we can wade out to the sandbars on low tide and go hunting for razor clams. Tell me, what'd you do with the surf clam? Is that something that you do something with to cook?
Yeah, surf clams are actually what I use for chowder. So a lot of people would use quahogs, and those are really good too, but the surf clams, quahogs where you can eat them raw or on the half shell or sauteed in a pasta dish. The surf clams don't lend themselves as well to those kinds of uses, but they're really great for chowder. And one important thing is you want to save the juice as you're opening them. That's really good for the chowder. And then they can be cut up into smaller pieces. So you get a lot of yield from one surf clam, and you can make a pretty good pot of chowder from not very many.
And if you had found a razor clam or more, what do you do with those?
I actually like them raw. Some people are not going to agree with me on that. I think they have a bit of a rubbery texture, but the flavor is so good that I think they're worth eating raw. They're also really good just sauteed, garlic butter, a little bit of white wine, really simple preparation. They're delicious.
So I know how to open a quahog and an oyster. With a razor clam, is it relatively easy?
I wouldn't recommend doing anything with razor clams where you are trying to open them. If you're gonna eat it raw, you're basically just you're not caring about preserving the shell, so you can just pry it open with your hands. Mm-hmm. And then if you're gonna cook it in a dish, you want it to open on its own, because otherwise you'll have little bits of shell. The shells are much thinner, so they'll break. You can't use a knife the way that you would with something like an oyster.
Hey, we're jumping around a little bit here, but I think that's okay. We got a question from a listener about your jam, another one about jams and marmalades. Samantha wants to know how long they last in the fridge, your homemade jams and marmalades.
Yeah, so I almost always can my jams and marmalades. And if you, there are a million guides to canning, but if you just use sterile jars and you pack them hot, wipe the rim, those will last preserved like that for a year at room temperature. And then once they're in the fridge, or if you skip this canning process altogether and just put them straight in the fridge, they will last for an extremely long time, especially if you're using a clean spoon to dip in. So when you get mold or something like that on a sweet jam, that is almost always because like you dipped your spoon in peanut butter or butter and then you put it in your jam. It's not usually because the jam itself it has so much sugar in it, and sugar is such a strong preservative that they should last months, if not years.
So much of berry picking and harvesting seems to be the kind of knowledge that is passed along from one person to another. At the same time, we have a question from a listener about a good berry field guide. Do you have something like that you would recommend to somebody?
You know, there are some good ones there. I believe there's one called Foraging New England, but I have to say I've actually had better luck with cookbooks when it comes to berries. I I actually have a great cookbook right here. I'm going to grab it. And it's by an Irish woman. So it's not necessarily specific to our area, but Forgotten Skills of Cooking by Darina Allen. This book is an amazing resource. She has a whole section on foraging and plant identification. And a lot of the plants are either the same or similar enough that they apply to here. And then she tells you what to do with them. So a lot of foraging guides that I have found tend toward the obscure, which is cool, but also not always as practical for everyday use or in the kitchen.
Wesley, how about you when it comes to guidebooks? Is there one for mushrooms that you particularly reach for often?
Well, the oldest and tried and true book is the Alan and Arlene Bissett and Bill Neal have the Cape Cod and Mushrooms of Cape Cod in the National Seashore. It's a great guide just all around, not necessarily just for beginners, but it's got a lot of it's well-documented species. It's a great way to learn how to identify between them, and some great descriptions. So, and Bill is a local mycologist, and Alan and Arlene, I think, are down in somewhere on the East Coast. I'm not sure where they're at now, but highly recommended.
We haven't talked much about eating mushrooms, Wesley. Is that, are you a kind of a mushroom enthusiast who likes the classification and finding, or do you also like to eat them?
Yeah, I think that I like them for all their characteristics. Certainly edibility is one of them. There's definitely some species that I prefer over others. I've tried things that aren't necessarily that great to eat just for the experience of knowing what they're like. But yeah.
Now, I know from fishing that just because something's edible doesn't mean it's good to eat.
Right.
Yeah.
Choice.
Around here right now, but if you go out foraging, do you light up when you find a particular kind of mushroom right now and think, oh, I'm going to take this home and fry it up, add it to a soup, a fall soup?
Yes, there's definitely some it's funny. There's a species that grows here that grows really more predominantly on the West Coast that was omitted from the book I just showed you, and it grows in the certain habitats on the Cape. And my concern for the habitats is actually preventing me from discussing the mushroom. The people, I think it's getting over foraged, and the tendency is when these mushrooms are harvested to sort of go in there and really do a lot of digging and trampling and things. So there are some species, a specific one that's one of my favorites. I'm just not going to talk about because I'm concerned about the overall effect on the ecology that foragers have who aren't conscious of their sort of footsteps.
So I know you lead tours. As you lead a tour, do you talk to people about the ecology and protecting it that way and trying to preserve mushrooms as well as finding and identifying them and harvesting them?
I definitely speak about how to harvest and how to sort of harvest to try to do the least amount of harm to the area that you're harvesting in. You want to protect the environment and the ecology so things return. I think there's so much that we don't understand about all these interrelationships around us. The tendency is to just sort of step on things first and ask questions later. And maybe that's something that requires revisiting.
I think we're going to go to a quick break here. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Elisa Orsini, and we're going to hear from her for just a moment, and we'll continue our conversation in another few minutes. I'm Steve Junker. Stay with us.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this event. I may or may not have an old fashioned in my fish mug, but anyway, I'm not really here to talk about that. So if you're enjoying the event, I would like you to go ahead and do something really important for me. We can only bring you these types of event with your support. So if you take a moment and go on over to capeandislands.org and click on that big red donate button, today during our event, we're going to give you our foraging bag. This is our vintage orange bag, but you know what? It is the perfect thing to take with you when you're heading out to the beach or you're wading out to a small sandbar to go look for razor clams. When you become a member at $5 a month, or you give a one-time gift of $60 all at once, we will thank you with the bag. But more importantly, we'll continue to bring you great events like this, the local food report, and everything that you love to hear on CAI. So take a moment. You can find the link right down in the doobly-doo on your chat. Check it out. There is so much more to talk about. Don't forget to keep asking your questions in the Q&A. Back to you, Steve.
Yes, and thank you for joining us, everybody, for the local food report roundup. This is Cooking the Harvest. A few reminders as we continue here that you can use the Q&A tab, which is in the bottom middle of your screen there, to write comments, to send questions to us. And if you see a question you like, please upvote that question. It'll move to the top of our screen so that we can be sure to answer it. And you can also watch the chat box. Alicia and the crew are posting some links there about the things that we're talking about. So it's a great place to get more information as the event is going on. Elspeth, hey, at one point before we got rolling here, you mentioned to me that you thought of foraging not only as dealing with food. Talk to me a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so I think that we think first about food, or I think first about food when I think about foraging, but the more I've learned about what's edible, the more I've learned other uses for things too. So we were talking about acorns. That is the edible fruit of the oak tree. But this is another, it's not really a part of the oak tree, but it comes from the oak tree. These are oak galls, which everyone probably recognizes. I'm sure you've seen them in the woods. They have a little hole usually, which is an exit hole of a wasp. And my daughter, who's 9, recently has gotten really into plant dyeing. So dyeing fabrics with foraged plants and making your own dyes. And part of that process is called mordanting. Mordanting? I don't know if that's a verb, but you use a mordant to set the dye on the fabric. So that it.
What is a mordant?
A mordant is often a chemical in modern dyeing, but it sets the color. So you have a beautiful purple, you have white fabric, and if you, without a mordant, the purple will just wash off after a few washes. So the mordant makes it stay. So it turns out that oak galls, which are the home of a parasitic wasp that lays its egg into the leaf of an oak, and then a reaction forms these balls that we see. And they're not the wasps that sting humans, so you don't have to worry about that when you're collecting. These make a great mordant. So they will make the color set instead of having to use a chemical. And there are all kinds of things like this in our environment that we have forgotten traditional uses for. And to me personally, reconnecting with those uses is what's really exciting about foraging. And like I said before, finding the real way, or the way that we maybe knew a long time ago that we've forgotten.
And I know we have you on the radio like every week, and you're on the website every week. But have you ever thought about putting it all together in a book?
I have. I'm working on a book proposal right now about tree nuts and their use as staple foods. So that has come from a number of conversations through the local food report. A lot of indigenous cultures and historic societies around the world used tree nuts as staple foods, including acorns, chestnuts, hickories. There are all kinds of different edible nuts that we have largely forgotten about in American cooking. And I am super interested in those and really excited about trying to connect people with that story.
It's so interesting. The whole nut, forgotten edible nuts is so great. Now, I know that you've been fascinated by acorns for a little while. In fact, this last weekend when you went out and did the foraging video, you also shot some footage of collecting acorns. Maybe we can take a look at that and you can describe what it is that you found and what we're looking at.
Yeah, so that acorn that I'm holding up there is, I'm pretty sure, I'm not exactly positive what species it's from. I think it's from either a black oak or a pin oak. And then the other longer one, that's from a naturalized European English white oak. So that came here sometime after colonization and they have spread, you'll see them around once you have your eyes open for them. Both have a nice meat inside, and there's a lot of work involved in getting to acorn flour, which I think is what deters a lot of people. But they're also an incredibly abundant, free, native food source. So you can see this, the one I'm holding up right here from I think the black oak is really yellow and buttery. All acorns, all oaks make acorns, but they all have different nutrition profiles, and they all also have different levels of what's called a tannin. You can see right there, I was peeling off a little skin that's called the testa, and that is high in tannins. So as you go through a process that's called leaching, where you take out those nut meats, you grind them up, you soak them in repeated changes of cold water. Some people actually do this in the top tank of their toilet. And before you freak out, remember that water is actually clean. It is not touching the rest of the toilet. This was historically done in streams or fast moving water. It'll speed up the process, but you can also just do it in the refrigerator by putting acorns that are ground up in a jar and then changing the water every day. And what that does is it pulls out the tannins. The tannins are really bitter. They don't taste good. You'll see here, we're having trouble cracking that acorn on the peach, but that's from the English oak. And you'll see this one comes out of the shell really differently. It comes out much easier and the nut is bigger. So these are sort of a new discovery for me, at least on the Cape. Other things about acorns, white oaks sprout in the fall, whereas red oaks don't sprout until the spring. So if you collect white oaks, you have to shell them and preserve them pretty quickly, whereas red oaks, you can wait a long time. And because of the tannins are both annoying because they don't taste good, but they're also a preservative. So people have found caches of acorns that are decades old that are still completely edible.
Now you have some acorn flour in the process of being made. Is that right in your kitchen right now?
Yeah, I do. So this is from those English oaks we were talking about. You can see tannins are also what's used in the leather making process. That's why it's called tanneries. So they have that deep brown color. So these are tannins leaching out and turning this water this deep brown. You see this fine part right here? That is ultimately sort of the color and the texture that you're going to try to get from everything. But these were just ground up in a food processor. You can see that dark brown stuff is little parts of the testa, and that will float to the top and kind of get taken out as we go through this leaching process. So I'll probably dump this today, do a few more changes, and then all you do to figure out, ooh, it's stuck, if it's ready or not, is you take a little bite. So if they're still bitter, then they're not ready. And if they taste bland, sort of like you would imagine a tofu or a wheat flour, then that's when you're ready to drain them, dry them either in the sun on a baking sheet, in your oven, in a dehydrator. You don't want to get them too hot because you will ruin the starches that act kind of like a cornstarch and make things thick and delicious. And then you use the finished flour after you've leached and dried, really similar to how you would use a cornmeal. So it's not a wheat flour. It doesn't have gluten. It's not going to rise, but like corn, it can be a staple food.
You make pancakes with them?
Yeah, you can make pancakes. I've made the two recipes that I like the best that I've made, I learned about there's a group called the New England Acorn Cooperative that is spreading what they call acorn culture. And they taught me how to make an acorn pudding with coconut milk, maple syrup, eggs, vanilla, and acorn flour. And it gets this really thick, velvety pudding texture that's really good. And my other favorite way to use it is actually in a beef stew. So you take not too much beef and you boil it with the acorn flour and some water. And when I read that, I thought, there's no flavor, how is this going to taste good? And it shocked me how good it was. It has that texture of like chicken pot pie with that velvety, creamy gravy, and it's absolutely delicious.
You're making me hungry. So kind of going off of that, we have a question from a listener or a viewer here, because we're on Zoom. What's the best way to tackle black walnuts, which is another fall treat, she says, but are tough to open? And are there other edible nuts around that we should look for on the Cape?
There are some other edible nuts around. There you can find the rare American chestnut that is struggling to survive. They often don't have a full fruit, but you can find the burrs on the ground. They look kind of like a sea urchin that's dried up. And beech nuts are also edible. Again, those can be a little harder to find here on the Cape, but across New England, those are pretty common. And then hickories, I have been told about isolated pockets of hickories. There used to be a lot more diversity in the nut trees on the Cape, and after the Cape was largely clear cut for agriculture, a lot of those haven't come back in the same abundance as they were here before. But I feel like I'm forgetting one. There are a lot there's a group called the Food Forest Initiative of Cape Cod that is trying to reintroduce a lot of these trees. So they're giving out free seedlings of things like hazelnuts, pawpaws, which are a fruit tree, not a nut tree, but another tree that they're hoping will renaturalize and spread across the area. And I did a really interesting interview last year with a Mashpee Wampanoag woman, Danielle Hill, who does a lot of food sovereignty work. And she was talking about sort of the mirror opposite of what Wesley was talking about with mushrooms and some over foraging issues. She was talking about the importance of remembering some of these species that we've forgotten, and how the interaction that we have with them actually encourages their survival, and remembering them as a food source, and remembering to want them here, and that wanting can be its own form of spreading their presence. So I found that really interesting way to look at it.
I know we have some slides of mushrooms and mushroom hunting. Let's take a look at those right now. And Wesley, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here. Can you see the slides?
I can't.
Let's see if we can, behind the scenes here, figure out the technology to bring the slides up so that Wesley can see them and we can talk about them a little bit. Wesley, we do have a question too at the same time, that from somebody viewing, who says that if you find a mushroom you're not sure about, is there somewhere on the Cape to send some samples to find out whether it's edible or not, or to let them know, or a picture?
Certainly can send, you can email things to Cape Cod Mycology at gmail.com, or you can send things to the mailing address that's associated with the website at capecodmycology.com. And I'd be happy to look at them. Posting them online is on the Cape Cod Mycological Society Facebook page is another option. I don't have a microscope currently, so I can look at the color of them, but I can do that really via the computer. The microscopy work that's required to oftentimes identify species is really fun to do, but I don't have a microscope. I do have a couple of colleagues with microscopes, so they may be able to help with that as well.
And Wesley, I can see the slide now. I don't know if you can. It's the one with the long white mushrooms, the saucer-like caps. What are we looking at?
So this is a photograph that Bill Ewell, who's a naturalist on the East Coast, just recently posted to his page. And this is a species, a common name. Steve, I'll give you the common name, is the destroying angel. And I think that's pretty telling of its power. The characteristics that you'd like to look for, I don't have a pointer here, but if you look at the bases, that bulbous base is a extremely defining characteristic of a number of species in this genus, this Amanita genus. So this is Amanita virosa. It also has white gills. If you look under the mushroom, the cap there has, the gills are white, and all Amanitas have a white spore print. So it's one way to narrow down your species. It also has a thin, what's called a veil. You can see this attachment to the stem, this sort of papery, very thin attachment on the stem. And that veil was actually protecting as the mushroom opened up, that veil was attached, and then it grew, and the veil broke off of the cap and stayed on the stem, and it protects the gills as the gills mature. So that's one to know. Beautiful mushroom. Ecologically, it's a mycorrhizal. So all Amanita species are connected to trees, plants as well. I'm assuming, I actually don't know if they're connected to plants. We do know they're connected to trees. And they're feeding the trees nutrients and water. And in return, the trees provide glycogen, glucose, sugars for the mushrooms to feed them. So.
Now this next picture, everyone is this like a forage, the results of a forage? Everyone's looking at spread out on a piece of paper or a sheet on the ground?
Yeah, Elspeth, can you remember where this was?
Yeah, this was in Wellfleet on a bayside forest near Bound Brook, and we did a foraging walk together through the Wellfleet Farmers Market. And I think, Wesley, I remember you asked everyone to just go find anything they could, bring it back, and then we would talk about what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a day there. We had a significant amount of species. It wasn't, if I recall, it really wasn't that wet either prior to that. So we had there's quite a bounty to discuss there, and quite a variety. That is not a mushroom.
Those look like figs.
This is Elspeth. This is your photo.
Yeah, those are figs. Do we want to change over to figs?
Sure. Let's look through the slides and tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting new development in my life. I have been interviewing people about figs, and they keep telling me for the past 11 years that you can grow figs here, and I have had this sad little fig tree barely hanging on for 11 years. And this year, I just want to encourage anyone out there who's trying to grow figs that you just have to be super patient, and it can be done. It appears they take a pretty long time to get established, but we got our first fig harvest this year, and it's a cool fruit to plant because they come in October and November, kind of right when you think a lot of things are winding down. You get this late season sort of warm climate Mediterranean fruit, and they're really good with great hill blue cheese and a little bit of honey.
How long before Steve, I just got a quick question. If you plant a fig tree, how long before the figs produce fruit?
Well, I was told shorter, but in my experience, I planted our fig tree 11 years ago, and it is only just now. I had pretty much given up, but it just started making fruit.
All right. Wow. Okay.
We had a fig tree we planted on the south face of a house, and in about 6 years, it was producing fruit. And it grew so happily that we had to lean out the second floor window to pick the figs from it. And then we had that really bitter cold winter, maybe 3 or 4 winters ago, where I don't think we got above 40 for more than 2 days in a month and a half. And that killed that fig all the way back to the roots. And now it's, rebooted up, and maybe next year it looks like it'll start making figs again. So we must be at the edge of the range, at least for that kind of a fig tree.
We are, and I've actually, some people that I've interviewed for the local food report have told me, and I still don't entirely understand how this was done, that there's a tradition among some people who had immigrated here from countries where it's also on the border, where they sort of dig down and lay the tree down and bury it for the winter, and then kind of bring it back up. I don't entirely understand how that works with the root bulb, but it is done, and other people pack a bunch of hay and dirt and burlap around. So there are a number of techniques for trying to avoid that winter kill, which seems to do a lot of fig trees in.
You reminded me that when we started this fig tree, I went out and wrapped it in plastic wrap, kind of sheets of plastic, the first couple of winters. And then it grew so big that you couldn't do that anymore. So
great.
What's this mushroom picture we're looking at, Wesley?
This is a mushroom that is called the, I'm going to give you a common name again, like it's called the honey mushroom, the armillaria. There's a few species of armillaria. This is Armillaria malea. It's got this golden honey coloration to it. It is commonly grows at the base of oak trees, and it's called in what's called cespitose. It grows in clumps, and it has rings to it. It's not really a beginner species. There's a couple of things that can be confused with that are deadly, such as the deadly Galerina is the common one that it's confused for. So I would certainly take a spore print of this. That's one identifying feature. And you get to know the species a little bit. You can safely forage for it, but it's not a simple beginner species.
Hey Wesley, when you say you're going to take a spore print, what does that mean quickly?
So you basically take the mushroom of an open capped mushroom. You cut the cap off, leave about a ½ inch of the stem. Take a paper plate or a piece of glass, put the cap down on the glass, let it sit there for 4 to 6 hours, Steve. And maybe cover it with a bowl so the air patterns don't disturb the spores. It will drop its spores. You remove the bowl, remove the mushroom, and there you have all of these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of spores left behind that have a specific color to them. And those can be used for identification or microscopy, as well as microscopy.
What are we looking at?
Or cultivation.
Elspeth, is this one of your pictures, it looks like?
This is, I see there was a question coming up about garlic mustard and where to find it. That is garlic mustard on the, I guess, screen left. It grows in disturbed areas, so just the side of the road, sandy kind of waste areas. Same goes for nettles. They also tend to grow in, areas disturbed by humans, a lot of roadside. You'll know the nettle's on the right. You'll know the nettle when you touch it because it will hurt you. So you want to bring gloves if you're looking for nettles. But those are both really great greens that are some of the first things up in the spring. They're super prolific. Garlic mustard is considered invasive and it spreads all over the place. So you can think of yourself as doing the world a favor when you pick a lot of it.
Okay, so this was from a listener, a radio listener who sent this in, who said that, let's see, it's volunteer arugula and some other things, Elspeth, some pieces.
Yeah, well, so arugula is in the, this is beautiful, by the way, and I want to eat it. But arugula is in the brassica family. Brassicas are mustards. They have those characteristic yellow flowers. Kale is also in the brassica family. There are a lot of brassica plants. Wintercress is one. Garlic mustard is another that grow wild and that you can find on the side of the road. And there are some species of arugula that will come back. So there's a wild arugula that I'm seeing more and more in people's gardens. I think people are hearing more about it. Has these beautiful yellow flowers. That doesn't look exactly like it. That looks almost like wintercress to me, which is a wild arugula brassica family. But once you learn about that family, you can get pretty confident identifying them in the wild and taking a little bit of a chance.
And these are autumn olives, right?
I am seeing a mixture, I think, of autumn olives and cranberries, which is genius because autumn olives are super astringent. My kids love them. I can only eat a few before my whole mouth puckers up. But I can see how cranberries, even though they're tart, they're not really astringent. And I think they would balance those out really nicely.
These pictures, those last two are from Sandy in North Falmouth. Thanks for sending them in, Sandy. I have a question about choke cherries. I'm going to throw this in here because we're kind of running out of time and I want to make sure we get to some listener questions here. Are choke cherries edible? Are the berries from choke cherries edible is the question.
Yeah, so when you're seeing when you're seeing wild cherries around here, oftentimes some are choke cherries and a lot are wild black cherries. And just to throw in another cherry species, there's also naturalized wild European cherries. So there's some confusion about which species is which. I recommend consulting a field guide to try to figure out what you're looking for. But the black cherries in particular, and those naturalized European cherries they both have a better flavor, I would say, than the choke cherries. And the black cherries can be used in wine making. They can be dried into like a fruit leather. They have a pretty big, all of the wild cherries have a pretty big pit to fruit ratio. So it's not like a cultivated cherry where you're going to get tons of fruit in a tiny pit. You've got a big pit, more like a beach plum, a big pit, a little bit of fruit, and you probably want to do some cooking to get around that pit.
Another question here I want to take care of has to do with shagbark hickory nuts. Are they edible? There's quite a few of those trees around the Falmouth area forest, says Edith.
Yeah, those are edible, and they used to be a lot more common. And that's exciting. I want to come see them.
Good. Well, I know that people will have more questions, both for Elspeth and Wesley here. If folks want to reach out to you directly, can they do that? Is there a way to send an email or where to find you? If they have questions about you, Wesley, if they have questions about mushroom foraging and what they found, what's a good way to reach out?
The two best ways are through the Facebook, either Facebook, which we have two groups on there. One's the Cape Cod Mycological Society and one's the Cape Cod Mycological Society group. Please ask questions there and post photos there. We're happy to collaboratively respond. If you want to reach me directly, it's Cape Cod, excuse me, it's capecodmycology.com, excuse me, capecodmycology@gmail.com. And I'd be happy to answer you directly through that medium as well.
And does the Mycological Society have tours that people can go on or lead like group walks?
We have, yes, certainly have group walks. We haven't had any this year. There's something potentially planned with the Barnstable Land Trust, but they're only going to do about 10 folks due to COVID. I haven't had I don't have anything else planned for the season, although I'm toying with the idea. I haven't come to a conclusion yet. But this has been a slow year due to the times we're all in.
Yes. And Elspeth, reaching out to you, I know your email's on our website, capeandislands.org.
Yes, and people can also go to my blog at diaryofaLocavore.com. If you post a comment there, that gets emailed directly to me. And we're always looking for new story ideas for the local food report. I'm interested about those shagbark hickories and so many of your questions. So please, I love hearing from you and hearing those stories.
Okay, there's so many questions about food I didn't even get to today. So it leaves me wanting more. That's good. Listen, thank you so much, Elspeth Hay and Wesley Price, for joining us today and talking with us about foraging and the local harvest and what we can find in the fall around Cape Cod. It's been great speaking with you today.
Great to speak with you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank the entire team that helped us put this event together. Producer Jennifer Gilchrist, David Cleckley for the technical directing, Alicia Orsini for the foraging videos, and Liz Lerner and Bailey Tonini answering questions in our Q&A, and of course, our guests. I'm Steve Junker. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey everyone, I wanted to pop in really quick and say thank you so much for coming to today's event and remind you that, you know, clearly we could have done this for a lot longer, an hour and a half, probably 2 hours talking about foraging and food. And these events only really happen with your support. So take a moment, head on over to capeandislands.org. We're going to have all sorts of questions, links. We didn't get to all the photos you submitted. Thank you so much for doing that. We're going to have that all up on our website. So follow up there. When you become a member at $5 a month or give a one-time gift of $60, we're going to thank you with our foraging bag. You can check that all out, capeandislands.org. Again, thank you for joining us for our event today.